Hello there, and welcome to the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. I am Vlad, and today I have a very special guest who's running for the US Senate and is trying to prove to us Bitcoiners that even though right now we're getting taxed and we're not getting represented, he's coming to represent the ideals of the American Revolution of no taxation without representation by trying to represent Bitcoin in the US Senate. His name is Bruce Fenton. He has been around since 2012 or 2013. He has been involved with the Bitcoin Foundation, and he has also been very interested in securities and stuff like that since before his Bitcoin days. I hope I didn't get wrong your era of involvement, but you can go ahead and correct me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was executive director of the Bitcoin Foundation. I was on the board of that back when I kind of first started in the space in 2010, and I've been in it ever since. Investing and hosts and just kind of being in the space full time ever since then. Until
Yes.
now. Now that I'm running for office.
And not only that you're running for office, but as far as I know, you sold about 70 or 90 Bitcoin to be able to fund your campaign.
Put 85 Bitcoin, I think it was, into the campaign. A little bit more than that. I think I put some more in yesterday. Like I think I put 7 Bitcoin more in. So yeah. Now, and I haven't spent that yet. I've been pretty conservative about the spending. I have to spend a lot now because the primary is only a month away. And I should have, I want to go into the general with a good war chest as well, if I'm fortunate enough to make it through the primary. So yeah, and I've got a lot of support from the people in the space. I hadn't been as aggressive about fundraising. That was probably a mistake. Because it does cost, like a lot of these things, it's millions and millions of dollars. I think my opponents raised 8 million or so. So ideally, spending is important. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't. I wish it was all about ideas. But people have to hear your ideas, and really the only way to do that is, or one of the only ways, is through advertising. You need some kind of advertising. Like I do really well on social media, but that's not enough. It's not like everybody's just going to see me on Twitter and come and vote for me. There's kind of a science to this and some marketing and that kind of thing, which I'm not a huge fan of, but it's sort of part of the game.
Right, so the point of this interview and the reason why I thought it would be a good idea to do it is to basically distinguish you from all the other candidates who are members of parties. They run on a very specific platform. You're an oddity in this landscape. You don't come from a political background. You haven't had political aspirations in the past. I think the most political you have been was maybe in the Bitcoin Foundation, some would argue, but also during the school board meetings where you went there and you tried to deconstruct their logic regarding the COVID restrictions. So I guess that was good practice, and it got you angrier because, as you said, you're the kind of guy who just said that he has had enough and is trying to fix the situation himself.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that now. There's a lot of people who are not happy with the direction that the world has gone and the direction America has gone. And I think that more people should be concerned. We see things in very left and right a lot. Trump versus non-Trump or something like that. I think that's unfortunate. I think more people should really look at systems. One thing Bitcoiners are great at, and engineers and people in our industry are good at looking at kind of, is something a workable system? How could you attack this? What could go wrong with this? Like I love Jameson Lopp's work that he does with the wallets. What could go wrong with this hardware wallet? And we need to look at that. Democrats and Republicans need to look at that about our government. Say, hey, if we have a scientist in charge who can shut everybody's business down, what could go wrong? What did go wrong? And so I think it's important to look at those kind of issues in terms of systems and what works, and maybe less partisan sort of politics around it.
I would even argue that USA is even more resilient by virtue of its federation status, as every state has its own independence to legislate. Whereas in the case of European countries, there was a lot more coordination, and the lockdowns were even more severe. Even in countries like Australia and New Zealand, it was a lot worse. So I think the United States, for all of the faults that you can attribute to the politicians in charge, there was at least a greater amount of resilience, and that's part of the feature. It's part of how the Constitution is constructed. Would you describe yourself as a constitutionalist or an originalist?
Yeah, I think I'm a constitutionalist, and I think the system did work. It could have been better, but there was a lot of good things about our system. One thing, that the fact that we have 50 states, so you had North Dakota, Florida, a couple states where, like especially Florida. Florida really kind of changed the narrative, because people were looking at New York and looking at Florida and say, wait a minute, there's no, it's not like everybody's dying in Florida. Why do we have all these restrictions? Or California and Florida, even more so, because the weather is more similar. So you really could make these comparisons, and then people could make their own decisions. You had a lot of people move out of California, move into places like Texas. You had people leave New York. A whole bunch of New Yorkers came up here to New Hampshire. So that part of it worked. Checks and balances. The courts have served their role. Could be better. I think we're still not quite following the Constitution, and we're at a very grave point, because the world is changing so much. Things could go either way. We could go down a path of more tyranny, or we could go down a path of more freedom. And I think we are in this incredible shakeup in the world. We're in historical times, so it's important to get this right. And go down the right path.
I suppose that people should also remember. So I don't know what your constituency in New Hampshire is like, or how much they like the idea of freedom, but these are the ideas that led to the current status of the United States as a superpower. It could not have been achieved otherwise, and you have to maintain it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. I mean, it works. And our founding fathers figured out it worked, but only after a bloody war. They went through a lot. It's interesting, if you look up their ages, we think of these as old men, but a lot of them were in their 20s and 30s. They were like our kind of generation. A lot of the cypherpunks and a lot of the people building in Bitcoin, they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, some of them 50s, 60s, but a lot of younger people. And that's the way the founding fathers were in America. They would have been cypherpunks, I think, but they figured out that this was the right way, and they put a lot of thought into it. They did these meetings where they'd meet for weeks and weeks. Imagine. I mean, it's kind of like our industry. I mean, imagine when if you put a bunch of people in a room for 4 weeks. You don't do that much these days. If they were writing the Constitution now, it would be a couple Zoom meetings, and consultants and lobbyists and everything else would be involved. It wouldn't be actually people sitting down and trying to think like what's the best solution, which I think is something that's a positive in our space. Like I say, engineers and cypherpunks and Bitcoiners, they do tend to do that. They do tend to sit and debate. I've enjoyed. Usually the best debates are ones that they're too smart for me to to add much value. I just kind of listen. But I've heard some very technical debates way into the wee hours, on the the proper nature of consensus rules and these kind of things. Putting a lot of thought into attack vectors and this kind of stuff. And I like to think of our founding fathers being like that. And we need to do that. It's what's the old saying? Comfortable times breed weak people, and that's what we're in now. We've had this period of comfort and things being relatively easy for many decades, so you have people kind of forgetting the importance of systems that work, so they're inclined to adopt things that aren't really workable or aren't really sensible. So yeah, I think it's important to go back to those basics, and just for us to think. I mean, even just forget about the Constitution for a second, and we just say, as people today in the world, in the United States today in 2022, what are the important things we can do to make sure that our world is the most free that it can be? And I think a lot of people aren't asking those questions, which is why I'm very concerned about tyranny and marching down the wrong road.
Did you get any kind of support from mainstream politicians or political parties, or are you up against pretty much everyone else who's part of the mainstream?
Yeah, well, I decided as a Republican, I'm really libertarian, so I would say Liberty Republican. We have a very strong Liberty Republican, Liberty wing of the Republican Party, sort of Ron Paul Republicans, people in office, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, and there's a whole bunch in New Hampshire. There's over 100 states that are Liberty under the Republican party. So yeah, in the primary, there's no sort of official support. Whoever wins the primary gets support. So if I win the primary, I'll have the whole state and national Republicans supporting me. And this is interesting. This is why it's such a winnable race. If I win that primary, I have a lot of support from national Republicans, and then it's very light in the general as well. So but yeah, for politicians, I didn't really seek out endorsements. I haven't done a lot of the classic kind of political type of stuff. I've just been focusing on New Hampshire voters and talking to them, trying to get the message out. So I haven't done I haven't seeked endorsements or anything. And I'm kind of unusual, because of the sort of liberty, liberty side of things. I'm not going to probably get an endorsement from your classic, sort of old school Republican. Or certainly there's not going to be many Democrats who would endorse either, which probably be now in the primary.
Well, they should endorse a candidate who cares about freedom as their own future and their own freedom of expression and their own financial freedom to spend their money however they want, as we have a lot of examples in the last couple of years where nasty precedents have been set, and it's only getting worse with proposals for CBDCs. They should understand the value proposition of this, and even if they disagree with you on some key issues, they should understand that freedom comes first, and without it, they cannot even express themselves and organize whatever it is that they're doing. But I've asked you if you received any kind of support or endorsements from mainstream politicians, because I didn't see that you got too much support from Bitcoiners. And I can understand that the worldview of the average Bitcoiner is that they have given up on politics altogether, and it feels like a futile effort that is not worth pursuing to them. And it's the old world that they're trying to replace in some shape or form. But at the same time, what we saw yesterday with, I think it was the Department of Justice shutting down a mixing service. It was on Ethereum, but it doesn't mean that they cannot do the same for Bitcoin. And it's worrisome, and it only reminds us that all of this is very fragile and at the mercy of a few institutions, and that's why we need to have representation in politics which defends these open source projects. Otherwise, it's only going to receive the same treatment of PGP in the early 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, you what a great point you make about freedom being the most important thing. It's so easy to be divisive and think Republican versus Democrat and getting caught up in minor issues. But if we don't have freedom, you're right. I should be reaching out to more Democrats to explain, that's what matters. You may disagree with me on guns, but you won't even be able to have that opinion if we don't have freedom. And you don't know who's going to be in power. So having a big state apparatus, Democrats are in power now. They may think it serves them, but Republicans will probably be in power in 2 years. So then you have a big state apparatus. It could be Trump in charge of it. We don't want that state power. I don't want anybody in charge of it. I don't want Trump or Biden or DeSantis or anybody. Doesn't matter. Even somebody I really like Rand Paul, I don't want him to have that power either if he were to be president. And one thing I like about him is that he wouldn't want that, to reducing power of government and freedom to take things like DCs, which I'm glad to hear you mention, because a lot of people don't realize how dangerous that is. If the government has the ability to shut off your money in a digital world, that is a power that is far too great for them to have. And everybody should be concerned about that. Everybody should be. Michael Moore was cheering today about them raiding Trump's house. And, I think we should be very cautious about that. I think people should be saying, whoa, what happened? What's the evidence? Why was this done? Even if you dislike Trump, you shouldn't be, it's a high bar. It's an unprecedented sort of thing. It's never happened in America before. So we should be saying like, hey, wait a minute, what? You better have a really good reason for this. Otherwise we slip into the kind of country we don't want to be. So I think it's important to talk in terms of systems and thinking about this. I do talk to a lot of people on the left about these kind of issues. It's harder to find common ground now because everything is so divisive. People get caught up in these, I think, more minor issues that are sort of purposely out there to divide people, because they know that they're very divisive issues. So the media, there's a lot of vested interests in pushing divisive issues because it raises money. If I go out there and I say, and they say, hey, what's your view on abortion? I say, well, it's sort of nuanced. Or if I say, something else is nuanced, that's not going to raise money. You're driven to go like one extreme or the other, in modern politics in the U.S. And that's unfortunate because a lot of nuance is lost. There's a lot of things that should be more. Most of them are somewhere in the middle on, but the system kind of drives people apart because there's a lot of money to be raised. The big gun organizations, they do really well when they're under threat. So like when Obama was saying he wanted to ban more guns, that was actually good for the gun organizations. They raised a bunch of money on it. So it's an interesting dynamic in politics. Sometimes the incentives are not, or almost always the incentives are not aligned. That's why we have such bad results. Of all these different organizations, sometimes they're actually incentivized to do the opposite of what, they say or what you think that they're doing.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I'm happy that you brought up the divisiveness of US politics. You can argue that in two-party systems, this is only natural, and you're going to have two opposite sides that always fight for power. But it got to the point where maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, you would have issues that united both sides. And today it's even harder to find that common ground which makes them come together and realize that you're part of the same nation and you have the same basic needs and the same basic interests. And at some point, it's for the best if you support whoever is in power and you try to cooperate as opposed to try to be destructive. And I'm not saying that it should become, cronyist to the extent that there is no more opposition. Opposition is good. And I tend to be a fan of this famous quote by Voltaire, and I'm pretty sure it was brought to America in some form. But he basically said that he would fight to death for your right to disagree with him. And that's one of the principles of free speech in modern times. And it seems like maybe social media is to blame, maybe something else, but it seems like people cheer when the other side loses. And it's this back and forth war which keeps on going. And it's not like the average person has anything to gain from it. It's just their identity. They identify with that side and they think that they're winning, but they're not gaining anything in reality. They are on the losing side, to be honest. So I'm happy that you're not either Republican or either Democrat, and you can look at all issues with the kind of wisdom which I guess is forbidden in party politics. Even if it's harder for you to get your message across, I think that this middle ground is useful. And yeah, keep on pushing nuances because people need to remember that life is a lot more complex than having something which belongs to ideologies that are opposite.
Yeah, well said. You've put a lot of thought into these things. I like it. Yeah, the finding common ground is so important. I don't. It's very unfortunate how America, like half the country, thinks the other half is wrong and lying, and they don't even believe the same things. We can't even agree on what's true or what words mean and different things like that. So that's hard. A lot of people have talked about like a national divorce where everybody goes their own states. And I see the problem is with that is that I don't see how it would work. We are one country. You can't just separate like what you're going to separate every state, blue states and red states. What about the red people in the blue states and the blue people in the red states? I think we have to, I think some people have asked me if it's good to have a national divorce. And I think we have to get along and we have to find that common ground. Like you say, 40 years ago, there was probably a lot more things we would have all agreed on. and we should find those things. There still is a lot of things we all agree on, or we should agree on, and we should be embracing those basic core principles, especially things like our Bill of Rights. Everybody should be defending free speech. Everybody should be defending the right to bear arms. I know that's a controversial one, but the basics, if we could find common ground, free speech, hopefully maybe that's an easier one. Or agreeing to disagree, not first about everybody just because they disagree. And that's hard sometimes. I mean, I get upset. And also, if you really, both sides really believe it's kind of like the end of the world if the other side wins. So part of you has to say like, well, what if I can't just get along and, to be agreeable if I really think my country's at threat? So there's a lot to it. And unfortunately, a lot of the dialogue is negative. I blame media a lot, and social media is not, social media social media incentivizes low quality conversation, and regular media has sort of totally abdicated their responsibilities of, journalism and telling the truth in exchange for, just sort of ratings. And that goes for all media, I'm not picking on any one side or any one type of media. They're all, and it's natural, they're incentivized by clicks and ad revenue and everything, but there isn't really much quality with it. And there's a lot of, they want you kind of in fear. They want a story. Before they had the wars, they had, the OJ Simpson trial or what, and they just did it with the Depp trial. They just tell you like, this is an important thing. Why is that important? I mean, the Ghislaine Maxwell's trial is going on at the same time. Newsworthiness, that's more important. Johnny Depp is not really, it's sort of entertainment. It's interesting. But it's not, they're just sort of telling you it's news because they know that it's going to get the eyeballs. You know what I mean? So their incentives are, they are what they are. I suppose I'd run it that way too if I was in their business. But it does cause, lower quality conversations. We're not talking about the big issues that I think we should be talking about. The nature of government and force, and what is money, and what kind of money should we use, and what should the economy look like, and human freedom, and these kind of things are what I think are really important. And instead we talk about a lot of, kind of whatever they tell you is the issue of the week or something. But, I mean, there's a lot of good tools for conversation too. So the positive is, maybe we're all getting better at understanding ideas. It's a lot easier to spread the ideas about something like Bitcoin or liberty right now because of the internet. So, that's a positive, I guess.
Yeah, and I want to pass on to you this idea, which I've learned in university from a book that's called Bowling Alone. And it starts from this metaphor of someone who was at the bowling alley, and he realized that people, instead of being engaged in the game and looking at the score and trying to figure out how to win the game, they were watching the TV screens above, trying to detach from the game and thinking of other issues that were not really concerning them. And this realization that the author had, his name is Robert D. Putnam, made him realize that America used to be about communities and people getting together at church, at various clubs that they were organizing, and meeting in person. That was the most important part. But when they started having cable television and all of these ways of accessing the media, including the internet, they became being more isolated from their neighborhood, from everyone else. They started hating their neighbor, even though they used to be friends and they used to do stuff together, only because the media told them that certain issues are worthy of hatred for the person next to you. And I'm pretty sure that he has a point there, that this social capital reduction that happened in the United States is part of the reason why we end up with these echo chambers online and with people who meet in person for the first time and they're like, how come this idea still exists? They feel like it's either obsolete or else scandalous or unconstitutional, and they can't even talk to each other. They can't try to find common ground. They find their comfort in whoever tells them that they should follow that idea, whoever speaks to them personally, but you don't really have debate. And that's super dangerous. Even if you watch late night shows, you realize that there's a huge divide and there's always this ongoing attempt to own the other side, to present this argument that basically destroys them and is gonna put them in defense. And it's not really healthy. If you look at TV shows in the 90s, I mean late night shows, you look at David Letterman, or before that you look at Johnny Carson, you see that there was a lot more debate. Now it's more polarized. You have shows of the left and shows of the right.
Yes. Yeah, it was even Congress, they would be more they would sort of argue on the floor, and then they'd be all friends. They'd go and have a drink together after the Congress session. You'd have Republicans and Democrats that were, notoriously good friends kind of after hours. And you didn't have this sort of divisiveness. You had schools, you'd have much more diversity in a school. You'd have, half the teachers would be Republicans, half would be Democrats. Everybody'd know, like, oh, my math teacher's a big Republican. And, there was more, same with colleges, there was just more diversity of opinions, more debate, more kind of healthy discussion. I remember like early in my career in the 90s, there was a business club that I was in, and there was a bunch of Republicans and a bunch of Democrats, and they kind of knew, and they would talk about it, but it was very, very civil. It's not like it would be now. Now you couldn't really, if you had a business group, like a local business group in a city, and you had like 3 prominent Democrats and 3 prominent Republicans out of 10 people, I don't know how that would work now, unless you'd either say don't discuss politics, or I don't know. Yeah, it'd just be very hard now, because it is, like you say, people have determined that it's worthy of hating somebody because of their opinions. So I think it's much, much more divisive now, and that's too bad, because we should have a lot more in common. I hope that it doesn't take some other outside force, where we're really, really threatened as a nation. We will unify quickly in the right circumstances, but I hope it doesn't take a war or something like that to unify America. And unfortunately, I see the chance of the division increasing. There's just you now have different belief silos, different people on the right and the left. They're getting their news from different places, so they have entirely different worldviews, different ideas about what's true, and then different ideas on how to interpret those things, which they can't even agree on what the true thing is, or what it means. Very, very different beliefs. And especially if you go like the 20% far left or far right, there's a lot of people on the right that are completely dropped off of mainstream news. They don't trust any of it at all. They view it as a complete sham. And so most of their communication is like Telegram groups, almost underground communications. And then there's people on the far left who, their own opinions are like totally unrecognized, and like there's like no overlap between people. And I don't think they're talking to each other at all. From what I see on the campaign trail, I don't think many Republicans and Democrats are talking to people at all. When I talk to a lot of Democrats, I get the sense that I'm the only, and I'm only a new Republican in this race, but I'm probably the only Republican they talk to. And they're talking to anybody on the left. Bad. I'd like to have more discussions. A lot of discussions into not too, but if we discuss, fun, grab more understanding, because we have really a situation that we're facing. Can't put a partisan bullet point. We've really think it's a good way to try to at least understand what the other side is coming from.
Gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro.
Voltoro is the exchange where you deal with honest and hard money. There's no fiat on-ramp or off-ramp, and you get to diversify your Bitcoin portfolio into gold or silver when you sense that a bearish moment is coming. Also, you can instantly trade your gold for Bitcoin to buy the dip. And if you're into gold custody, Vaultoro can also send you the gold that you own directly from their insured Swiss vaulting facilities. Vaultoro was launched in the aftermath of the Mt. Gox hack, so since 2015 they have published monthly glass books to prove that they own all the gold reserves and all of their customers' money. Sign up today by going to vaultoro.com/Bitcoin takeover. Keep in mind that this is not financial advice and you are responsible for your own decisions. Wasabi Wallet is the perfect Bitcoin privacy wallet. It's free, it's open source, it's available on Windows, macOS, and Linux, and it offers groundbreaking Chaumian CoinJoins, which makes your Bitcoin. Even if you do not use the CoinJoin feature, you still benefit from a trustless experience with block filters, a hidden IP address via Tor, and easy management of your wallet outputs. After you deal with KYC exchanges like Coinbase, like Kraken, Binance, Gemini, or Bitfinex, you can remove the association between your identity and your Bitcoin address by performing a few rounds of CoinJoins. To find out more about the privacy benefits and limitations of CoinJoins, listen to Bitcoin Takeover Podcast Season 6, Episode 6 with Max Hilbrand. And if you want to give Wasabi a try, go to wasabiwallet.io and download the wallet for free. Wasabi Wallet, a Bitcoin privacy wallet for the citadels. So I just want to let you know that I come from Romania and I still live here. And in my country, we value freedom a lot more, mostly because we haven't had it until 1989. It took a violent revolution to get away from a formerly communist regime, which was heavily influenced by the USSR. And right now we are doing our best to become a democratic country, and we still have our shortcomings. We still have people who were educated under the former regime and did not get away from that mindset. But it seems like we appreciate freedom a lot more. And you could see it during the pandemic. You can see it today. You can see how we find reasons to mobilize. And it's pretty ironic to us that the countries that taught us about democracy and how to organize protests and how to stand up for our rights are walking towards a different direction, which does not necessarily concern the same universal ideals. How do you see the situation in the United States in regards to the Constitution and the idea of universal human rights that apply even to the people you don't like? And what do you think can be done to improve the situation?
Yeah, that's a real dilemma because, we've been so comfortable for so many decades that people have taken freedom for granted, and they've forgotten how valuable it is and how important it is. And it's very slowly, and actually over the last couple of years more quickly, moving more towards tyranny. And a lot of people don't get it. And especially a lot of younger people, they never really had they don't really understand what tyranny is like. And a lot of people don't get that once you lose freedom, it's very, 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 very difficult to get back. Because once they lock down, once government has that kind of power and they just take your freedom, then you're at a huge disadvantage for trying to take that back. So, it's unfortunate, but I think this is a natural cycle that a lot of countries go through. And it's not a coincidence that a lot of the people talking about freedom here in the United States are first generation immigrants, people who came from Eastern European countries, people who came from the USSR, people who've seen this kind of thing firsthand. One of the people running for Congress here in New Hampshire, she came from communist China, and she's running because she doesn't want to see that happen to this country. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned from people who were in oppressive regimes, and a lot of people in the U.S. aren't listening. They're thinking that they have a better way. They're putting, if you just give politicians enough power, you'll be okay. And they're not thinking in terms of, like we were talking about, workable systems. They're not thinking about, does this stuff make sense? Can it work? And the answer is it can't. If you give a bunch of power and control and a monopoly of force to government, it always ends up being bad for the people. So I hope we can wake up enough people. As far as a solution, going back to our roots, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, these are a good place to start. Just getting people to wake up somehow. I hope it doesn't take more of a crisis. I hope people kind of come to their senses. But it is tricky to get people to understand the importance of freedom and liberty if they aren't getting it already.
On the topic of the Bill of Rights, you mentioned earlier that the founding fathers of the United States were very young. And I just checked, and James Madison was 36 years old when he wrote the Bill of Rights, which is incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Some of them were older. I think Ben Franklin was older, but yeah, I mean, it's our time right now. These people were human beings just like us. They were, if they were around today, I mean, their counterparts would be on Twitter. They'd be probably similar to us in a lot of ways. They'd be going to conferences, and you'd have Hamilton or Jefferson or Madison. They'd be speaking at events. Maybe they'd be at Bitcoin Miami, as a guest keynote, and they'd have 1 million followers on Twitter. So we're not that different, but we've got to do what they did, which is, one, recognize the problems with the state, and two, put forth solutions. And the solution that they had was, exactly that, the Bill of Rights, limiting state power. And that's what we should remember. The Bill of Rights is to limit state power. It doesn't give us rights. It says these are the things the state can't do, because they recognize that the state is a very dangerous and deadly force. It's one of the most dangerous and deadly things in the world. It's much more dangerous and deadly than COVID or Ebola or other diseases. It's the governments have killed 300 million of their own people over the last century, just their own people. That doesn't even include outside wars. A lot of times, most times are started by governments, or made worse by the governments as well. So you're talking about a lot of death. But killing their own people is probably the most dramatic statistic, because it's like, well, how do you claim you're helping, this institution of government is helping its people when it so often ends up in mass death for the people? People have got to recognize that the downside of government, it's like much worse than the downside of, power tools or any other dangerous thing. Downside of government is very, very, very bloody, and it should only be used as a last resort when there's no other tool that could possibly work.
Yes, and we should not forget that the state is nothing but our collective imagination, as there is no state. It consists of our consent to be governed. It's just our willingness to let other people control our lives and tell us what to do. In the beginning, it was based on specialization and the way of allowing skilled people to be in a position to make decisions. But as it degenerated and enabled people who have no skills or no qualifications to be in a position of power, I think we have had in our history lots of examples where the state became evil and committed murder. Even here in Romania, we had examples of torture. We had Holocaust concentration camps during the 30s. There are lots of atrocities, and they only happen because people don't have a neutral and universal system of values, a system of reference. They appeal to the nearest authority, and they follow orders blindly without considering what they're doing through a different set of values. And I'm pretty sure that in the 18th century, with the American Revolution and then the French Revolution, we have acquired this culture of understanding that there are, in fact, some universal human values that we should respect and that we should take into consideration when we take action. And these are not being taken away from us unless we consent for them to be taken away from us. And there's always this debate between safety, between the feeling of allowing somebody else to take care of you, of paternalism or whatever you want to call it, and freedom, which means that you embrace all the risks that are associated with it, but you live your own life by your own terms. I think the United States became successful specifically because it enabled the largest degree of freedom. Now, I'm not sure if that's the case anymore, but in a world that's becoming more authoritarian, to put it like this, I see a lot of value in sticking to the roots of the United States and being competitive in what the US does best.
Yeah. And I'm optimistic about that. It'd be very interesting to see what happens in these elections and the next election, for president in 2 years, because America could really write the course and go down a path of, because we're either going to go down a path of like China and be more central control, more authoritarianism, central bank digital currencies, social credit scores, boots on heads for a generation, or we're going to go down this path of freedom in the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and our core values. And there's a lot of people on both sides. There are people in academia and Hollywood and the media, and a lot of people in politics who want to go down kind of this China model. And there's a lot of people that believe in the core values. I'm hoping that I think the authoritarians are kind of won the last couple of years. They were sort of ahead, but I think that there's a lot of people like me that are kind of pushing back now. And I hope that it goes back, the other direction with a decrease in these kind of things. But I'm optimistic about our ability to kind of write the path and embrace what we're really good at. Like you said, freedom has been our strength, and the whole world has descended into this tyranny, and tyranny just doesn't work. This is the thing. It's not like, there's a lot of people who are looking at it surface level deep, and unfortunately, a lot of them are billionaires and celebrities like LeBron and other things like that. And they're looking at it saying like, well, we have this nice system with nice cars and fancy hotels, and China has this nice system with nice cars and fancy hotels. But that's very, they're looking at it both being like, well, here's one way and here's another way, but they're looking at it very superficially. China on the surface appears to be a successful economy, and, to the untrained eye, but in reality, if you look at the real numbers and you go, one level deep into their currency, and you look at the cost, the human cost, the moral cost, the social cost, the pollution cost, and everything else, it's very flimsy, and the whole thing might just fall apart. There's all kinds of problems with it. It's just not a good system, and it's very ignorant to look at one system and another and think that they're somehow equal. Our system is right. Our way of right is right. Freedom is good. Central control and a bunch of bureaucrats having social credit scores and stuff like that, it's not just antithetical to our ideals and what we stand for. It's just a bad idea. It's just a bad idea. They don't know anything. The government officials don't know how to run economies and stuff like that. That we everybody should know that. So it's really important to embrace our core values, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, because it's the best system. It's better than the alternative out there. But we've got to. This isn't going to happen without a fight. There's a lot of interests who really believe that that's a better way, and they kind of run a lot of the world. They run a lot of Hollywood, academia, media, the World Economic Forum, Davos, these kind of things. There's overwhelmingly this attitude of control and centralization. A lot of that fed directly from China, and even business deals with China have kind of pushed that worldview forward. But it's an incorrect view, and it would lead to a lot of heartache and bloodshed for a long time if we don't fight it.
Based on my experience as a European, I'm going to disagree with you there and say that authoritarianism does work. It builds these huge, beautiful monuments that become touristic attractions, but it comes at the expense of turning 90% of the population into slaves who make this dream happen. So maybe that, some people enjoy what's being built under authoritarianism. Even Nazi Germany built the Autobahn, which are the world's fastest roads, which are very sturdy and wide, and they have no speed limits. But they built them to transport tanks to Poland. So that was the initial purpose. Today they are being used by car enthusiasts who like to speed around and try their cars at the top speed, whatever. But it's just a way of presenting trade-offs, because you can have stuff that's being built under authoritarianism, but it's not really worth the price. It's not the kind of price that America should pay. And there are countries around the world that seem to be willing to pay it, but they're not developing at the same pace as the United States in the last 250 years.
Yeah. The price is never worth it if it has to interfere with the individual, the rights of the individual. The individual is the ultimate minority, and every individual should be protected to do what they want and pursue their own version of happiness and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and have their body and their property protected and free from assault, but from anybody, even people wearing a badge. They if they don't harm anybody, nobody should harm them. And so, yeah, the authoritarian countries, that is to me, an undoable trade-off, because, and this is something I wish was ingrained with more Americans. I think people a little younger than me, it's not as common. They didn't teach it as much in schools, but I was always taught that, this is what we're all about. Like, never, ever, ever sacrifice the freedom. It's worth dying for, because it's everything. And there's still a lot of people like that. There's a lot of people who just won't, they'll never take a knee. There's that famous, there's that great scene in, I think it's one of the Captain America movies or the Avengers. And the villain Loki comes out and he makes everybody kneel. And there's one guy who, based on his accent and his age, sounds like he might be a Holocaust survivor or something like that. And he's like, no, I'm not going to kneel. And there's a lot of people who have that attitude, and that's historically been a very American kind of thing. Like, no, we're not gonna take this. We're not, Rosa Parks, she's not going to sit at the back of the bus. These kind of, there's a lot of great Americans who have that attitude of like, we're going to stand up for that individual liberty. It's worth dying for. Martin Luther King was locked up a bunch. I think he went to jail 70 times or something like that. I think that's about as American as you can get, to say, we're sticking up for the individual. The individual is the ultimate minority worthy of protection.
I'm really happy that we got to this point, but I must also ask you, since this is a Bitcoin podcast, I must get to the part where I inquire about Bitcoin and to which extent it's a big part of your campaign.
Yeah, I'm already known as a Bitcoiner. Usually the media refers to me as a Bitcoiner. So I don't emphasize it too much, because it's sort of like, for people who aren't familiar with it, it seems like a one trick pony kind of thing. Some people, like people who are not in the space, they say, what is this guy doing? Is he trying to sell his product? Does he work for Bitcoin? It's a little confusing for people. So I don't emphasize it a ton, in the campaign, like, hey, look at me, I'm a Bitcoiner running for Senate. Because I don't think people would care. I don't think that'd get me too many votes. Bitcoiners already are going to vote for me, but what I do talk about a lot, and it relates to Bitcoin. Usually I mention Bitcoin, at least in every speech. But what I talk about a lot is money. And if I, aside from politics, if I meet somebody at a cookout and they say, hey, tell me about Bitcoin, first thing I always do is tell them about money. I tell them about money first, because that's what's important to me in the Bitcoin story. You have to understand money first, before you even worry about understanding Bitcoin. I'd rather, if somebody only had 2 hours to research Bitcoin, I'd say spend an hour and a half researching what money is, and then look into Bitcoin. Or if they had 3 weeks or 6 weeks or a year, I'd say spend a good amount of time, trying to figure out what money is and what. And it's not that hard, with just an hour's research, you can learn. Just Google properties of money, if you haven't. And I, that's what I recommend to people. So I do talk about the broken fiat system a lot in the campaign. I talk about that all the time. And I do mention that Bitcoin, in my opinion, is a solution for it. the bigger thing is that it's a real serious problem, and it is it's both very damaging economically, and it is also evil. Use the word evil earlier to describe government, and I don't take that word lightly, but I can't think of anything, if fiat's not evil, I don't know what is. Fiat to me is one of the most evil things in the world, because it enables unaccountable people to create something they can call money from thin air and have no accountability. So they can just print from thin air and say, okay, let's cage people for the drug war, or let's bomb country, or let's send a drone here, spy on civilians or whatever. Very, very, very bad things happening in our world. The most evil things, death, a million Iraqis dead. These are serious issues. And they're enabled by fiat. They would never happen without the fiat system. So I do go so far as to say that I consider fiat evil. And I don't take that word lightly. And Bitcoin is an alternative to fiat. Bitcoin is sound money. And historically, the Cantillon effect says that people are going to move more towards the most sound, money that's limited in supply and everything else. And something that's being printed from thin air by politicians, that's not really money. It's just something they call money. And eventually the chickens come home to roost, and that doesn't work anymore. It's a scam.
I know that Thomas Jefferson was a fan of gold and silver and opposed the idea of having a central bank, even though I think Alexander Hamilton was the biggest proponent, and George Washington chose to listen to him as opposed to Jefferson. But I'm pretty sure that at least 2 or 3 founding fathers, so I guess Madison and Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, they would be big Bitcoiners if they lived today.
Yeah, and Hamilton he'd be doing his third. He would have done 2 ICOs, and he'd be on his third DeFi project right now, and he'd have $1 billion from all his pre-mined coins. It's a heck of a musical. I love that musical. I think it's a masterpiece, Hamilton. But as a person, he wasn't a great person. And the central bank thing is just such an unintentionally horrible legacy. It's just so amazing. Like, he had no idea how horrible it was and how bad it would be, and how much death and destruction it would cause. And most people don't get it either. They just list him right along with the others. It's just, this is the thing with bureaucracy. Unintentionally bad ideas can wreak havoc for centuries, decades and decades. The people who wrote the securities laws, the SEC laws governing Celsius and Luna and Ethereum, and sometimes trying to govern Bitcoin, these laws were written by children of Civil War veterans. They were written by people who were born in the late 1800s. I looked it up just a little while ago. The main authors were born in the late 1800s or early 1900s. Or actually, no, I think it was all late 1800s, because it was 1933. So they were all in their 40s or 50s or 60s when they wrote this law. And so it's ancient. It's like a long time, but the things still affect, just like Hamilton. He wasn't that smart, and he was one of the younger ones too. He's just this kid. I mean, literally, he'd be a third tier B-lister doing ICOs right now, or doing scammy DeFi projects right now. He's a joker. He didn't get economics. I mean, he's a great writer, but like whatever. I mean, we can picture exactly what Alexander Hamilton would be if he was around today. We know exactly what he'd be. And that's the problem. You get these opportunists, they create damage, and it lasts for decades and decades, and in this case, centuries.
Yeah, he was like 30 or 32 during the revolution. It's
Amazing.
not clear if he was born in 1755 or 1757, so the sources disagree to some extent, but he was 30 to 32 during the revolution, which means he was super young. My age, basically.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible?
It
It'd
is.
be a fun movie. Somebody should make a movie, like a fiction movie about like science fiction, where all these people come forward and they're all like in our times. Like, what would his Twitter look like? Would he be? I know he'd be a DeFi, or like he'd be doing some kind of scammy thing. I know he would be. just feel like he would be, but it would be interesting to think about these people if they were contemporaries of us in our times. What would Jefferson's Twitter feed look like? I bet he'd be pretty witty. I don't know. It'd be interesting.
He was very erudite. Before he became a founding father, he was an ambassador to Paris from the Confederation. So he was like a crony even of the former regime, but joined the revolution.
Yeah. Interesting. I love history. It's great to follow. And in the campaign, I end up going to a lot of historical sites and reenactments and things. It's just parades. It's just kind of part of the thing. So, I carry around the Constitution on the campaign trail, just to have it in case somebody asks me some amendment or something like that. So I have the reference. And I think, so it makes me think a lot about these things. I think about the founders and what they might've been thinking, and what it was like for them. And, there is a lot that we still have in common, especially for me running for office now, a lot of them ran for office, same kind of thing. A lot of the, they had their own version of memes, they had their own version of like speeches, and, some of the stuff is unchanged. A lot of it's changed a lot, but some of it's unchanged.
Yeah, I think of Bitcoin and the US Constitution as very similar in this respect, because both of them are very hard to change. And there are lots of people who would prefer a certain version of them, and they would try to do them differently. But there's nothing they can do about it except for starting their own country or starting their own altcoin. Those are the only approaches. But none of them ever end up being as successful as the original.
Yeah. I think that the world could learn from Bitcoin. This decentralized way that it works is, very different. When I first got into Bitcoin, somebody said there's no leaders. I'm like, oh yeah, right, sure. Come on, that sounds like great marketing, but who's really in charge? And then I figured out, oh, it's got to be the core developers. They got to be in charge. And I just thought it was kind of, when people said that they weren't really in charge, I'm just like, oh, come on. They of course they're in charge. Like, they're the developers. They could do. And it took me a long time. I mean, I was probably in Bitcoin for a year and a half before I really understood, like just how hard it is to change, and just exactly why, a handful of miners can't just get together and decide to change something, or why co-opting one important developer is not going to really mean anything, especially for something ridiculous like, let's add 1 million, make it 22 million coins and give me 1 million. Like, that's never ever a thing. Like, there's just no way. Like, even if you kidnapped a developer and made them write the code, it doesn't, as you know, it doesn't matter. Like, you could take over the whole GitHub and write myself 1 million coins. It would never ever go anywhere. Nobody would ever put it on their miner, so it would never come close to mattering. And all those developers could just, even if somebody arrested them or whatever, the Git would go away and a new Git would be there, and the rules would be the rules, and it took a while for me to understand that. I didn't understand how how it worked. But I think that the political world could learn something from Bitcoin and learn something from this space, because it's a great model. It's a great, sort of way for people to be aligned in their interests and get behind something that they know is true. In this case, code. In a world where nobody can agree on anything that's true, but everybody, Republican, Democrat, everybody agrees that a block works like it says, roughly every 10 minutes. There's a thing, and there's some software, and some nodes run it, and some miners run it, and it creates these things called Bitcoin. Everybody agrees on that. That's real, and we can get behind that and have some certainty in an uncertain world. And I think that's a good thing. And I think if Bitcoin can export some of those values, some of the cypherpunk values, and I just think it's a good way of looking at the world. Even things like religion, to kind of look at it through a cypherpunk lens of sort of, here's the information, take it or leave it. Just kind of, more independent, more distributed. I think it's an evolution in thinking. That's just a superior model than the one unfortunate thing about running for politics actually is that it drags me into more of the conventional world of like, hey, look at me, I'm a centralized person. Here's my selfie. I'm doing something important because me, look at me, vote for me. That's not very cypherpunk at all. I was the opposite direction just a couple of years ago. I mean, well, even just matter of months before running, 8 months ago, I was a very different person. I was very more, that way because I think that's the next evolution. When I was in my 20s, I wanted to be, well known. But then when I got into this space, I kind of evolved. I think it was like, I want to be a cypherpunk. The best people in our space, some of them nobody even really knows their names. And I think that's a cooler model. More about ideas rather than people. But then you get into politics, and it sucked me back into the what I think is a lower end thing. So I hope that Bitcoin can export that to the political world, make people care more about ideas and code and what's true rather than, personalities and pundits and, self-marketing or whatever.
Not only that, but it gives you a predictable foundation that you have and on which you build. So whether you like it or not, you're going to build on top of that. That's the end of discussion. It's the same with the Constitution. Whether you like it or not, you have to respect somebody else's free speech. And you have to respect everything concerning the Bill of Rights when it comes to every individual. You might not like them personally, but the fact that they are citizens of this country means that they are entitled to these rights. So you have to respect that, which I appreciate. It's like a universal system of truth, which allows everyone to be free, even if it seems restrictive.
I like it. You should run for office in the US.
No, I don't think I can. Maybe if I become a citizen, but
Yeah,
I don't think I want to anyway. I tried to run
Smart.
here in Romania. I was such an oddity that I think I give up. They did
Yeah.
not understand. I was also about freedom and the Constitution. And they're like, why do you need that? We want bigger pensions. And I was like, oh man. Okay, just I'm gonna try. I'm gonna shoot my shot. I failed miserably. I couldn't even get 2% in my district, and I realized how much time I spent traveling and talking with people. And I went back to building stuff. Maybe it will work the other way around. Maybe one day when I get older, they will ask me to run for office as opposed to me asking them to give me a chance to defend their freedom.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that the roles will switch. But in your case, it's kind of one in a lifetime opportunity. I think the time is right for this type of representation for Bitcoin, as it's only getting worse. And
Right.
not only that it's getting worse, but the people who make decisions regarding this open source software, they don't understand any of it, and they don't seem to want to understand how it works. They are only concerned with preserving the system.
Yes. Yeah. It's important. I mean, I think Bitcoin's under threat, and especially Bitcoiners should understand that. Bitcoin is under threat. It's a mistake to say, "Oh, don't worry about it. Bitcoin will be fine." It's the altcoins that are going to get crushed. There's heavy efforts at all kinds of federal level to harm Bitcoin. Biden put out this executive order for all the agencies to come back with plans around cryptocurrency, and that includes Bitcoin. So you've got the IRS and a whole bunch of other agencies that are kind of gunning for this overall technology, including Bitcoin. So it's something Bitcoiners should pay attention to. And also it's, freedom is important. Like you say, I'm a big believer that we shouldn't have I don't want to see the SEC go after coins that I don't like. I don't care if I dislike a coin, I won't buy it. If I really dislike it, I'll tell people not to buy it. And if I hate it, I'll tell people it's a scam, or if it is a scam, if I hate it and it's a scam, if it's one coin, I'll tell people it's a scam. Usually I don't feel it's, I have a high bar to call something a scam. I want to make absolutely positive. I don't usually have the time to research, I don't want to just spend 10 minutes and then potentially ruin somebody's reputation incorrectly calling them a scam. But usually I just say terrible economics. There's a lot of things with terrible economics, a lot of bad ideas, a lot of things extremely likely to fail, a lot of things that are, really designed to enrich founders. just total junk. But I don't want to see the government stopping that. I want the market to just work. If something's junk, the market will figure it out. It's not my, and it's a big drawback for all of us if we try and expand the authority of the SEC or anybody else, because today they might be cracking down on hex, but tomorrow it might be Bitcoin. We don't really want them to expand. And even if somebody just hates a certain coin, I don't really want to waste our tax dollars. I just don't care. Like, I don't want to waste, I spend so much on taxes. I don't want to waste the money so the SEC can go chase somebody. I'd really rather just have the market do its thing. If somebody's committing outright fraud or, lying or stealing, a lot of these total rug pulls, those are usually, there's often criminal fraud involved with some of those, but things that are like bad ideas or just, like if somebody wanted to have some heavily pre-mined thing and just artificially inflate it and sell it, I don't feel like it's government's role to do that. I don't really want to waste my tax dollars messing with that. I'd rather have, I'd rather support people in the private sector to go out and say, hey, that's a scam or that's junk or whatever. And it's not like these things, it's not like it's a permanent problem. Like, oh my gosh, forever, because the government wasn't there, forever and ever and ever, these coins just went up and up and up and everybody kept buying them. Of course not. They're going to collapse on their own anyway. You don't really need government. If anything, government kind of delays it. One of the reasons that we had all of these, junky ICOs was because real securities were so hard. Like, if somebody could have done it, they would have said, hey, here's equity in my business. Here's a token. I'm selling 10% of my business for $1 million. Buy some. And that's a token. It could be a token. But because that was so hard, they said, well, it's not really shares in my business. It's a utility. And then, it's kind of like they were trying to get around the rules and inadvertently ended up making even worse instruments than they would have had anyway. Equity is very risky, but at least it's a thing. Nothing wrong with equity as a structure. So they ended up making things worse. I think the regulations made things worse. And ironically, the thing that has been best about this has been how the market is self-corrected. ICOs wouldn't work right now. Nobody could do a 2016 style white paper and raise $100 million in 30 minutes right now. That's just not a thing, because the market, not because of regulators, but like if you could do it legally, it still wouldn't work, because the market knows, like, oh, even the word ICO, they have to change the name because it's like people recognize it. So I'm a big believer in just, let the markets do it. Don't waste our tax dollars trying to, and it's not like they're going to fix it anyway. It's not like, oh, if we only give the SEC enough, they're going to cancel every scam and everything will be great. That's not going to work anyway. So I just want to see the markets do their thing.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the legal tender issue, as there are at least two countries that I know of, El Salvador and the Central African Republic, that adopted Bitcoin as a legal tender. And do you think it's a good idea on the state level or the federal level to use Bitcoin as a mean of payment, or to pay your taxes at least?
Yeah, I think so. I think the government should allow it. If I'm elected, I would want to have the government allow, allow anybody to use any kind of currency they want, including Bitcoin for whatever. I like to see more currency competition. I think that eventually leads to decreasing the power of the Fed and getting government entirely out of the money business. I don't think we need a central bank. Just let people decide what money is. And if the government wants to deal with people, they could deal with whatever sort of money they want. So I'm all in favor of it. I don't think it's the end all. A lot of people view this as like, this is the ultimate victory. I don't think it's the ultimate victory. I don't really even want governments to own Bitcoin or do anything. I'd rather have them just, ignore it. I think the ultimate victory is getting a whole bunch of people to buy Bitcoin. So I'd rather have, to the extent, if I was in office, if I had a choice of, the United States government buying, $100 billion worth of Bitcoin, or just something making it easier for the people to buy their own Bitcoin, I would definitely choose the latter. I don't think it's a big victory for, it'd be nice. I mean, it'd be great to go on a Bitcoin standard rather than a gold standard. It's certainly, better than what we have now, but I don't view it as the ultimate victory. I don't want to empower governments at all. I want to empower the people. I think the greatest victory would be if everybody in America owns some Bitcoin, and we have the most Bitcoin holders in aggregate. And then it doesn't really matter what the government has or doesn't have.
Not only that, but Bitcoin, if it's being held by politicians, how do you know that it's going to belong to the state and they're not going to run away with it somewhere else?
Yeah. Yeah, that they would. I mean, if they had it, especially if Bitcoin does, a lot of us are expecting Bitcoin to, do very, very well in the coming years. If they bought billions of Bitcoin now and they become worth hundreds of billions or something like that, then politicians are always tempted. And a lot of times they don't need to even steal it and run away with it. It's much more subtle than that. They just give it to their cronies and their friends, and they can do it often totally legally. Some of the biggest grafts and frauds are totally legal and right above board. They're not even breaking any law. They're just rewarding these contracts to cronies and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's why gold is better for governments, as it's heavy, it's weighty, it's hard to move around, as opposed to Bitcoin, which can be used by people to protect themselves against governments by crossing national borders with nothing but 12 words in their head and stuff like that, or a
Exactly.
USB flash drive. That's a good way to protest against your government and take your wealth elsewhere in case it becomes authoritarian.
Exactly.
And I don't see any value in governments doing this. But anyway, I asked you because it was one of the questions that you received from the audience.
Oh, good.
Commercial break. Gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro.
Voltoro is the exchange where you deal with honest and hard money. There is no fiat on-ramp or off-ramp, and you get to diversify your Bitcoin portfolio into gold or silver when you sense that a bearish moment is coming. Also, you can instantly trade your gold for Bitcoin to buy the dip. And if you're into gold custody, Voltoro can also send you the gold that you own directly from their insured Swiss vaulting facilities. Voltoro was launched in the aftermath of the Mt. Gox hack, so since 2015 they have published monthly glass books to prove that they own all the gold reserves and all of their customers' money. Sign up today by going to voltoro.com/Bitcoin takeover. Keep in mind that this is not financial advice and you are responsible for your own decisions. Wasabi Wallet is the perfect Bitcoin privacy wallet. It's free, it's open source, it's available on Windows, macOS, and Linux, and it offers groundbreaking Chaumian CoinJoins, which makes your Bitcoin. Even if you do not use the CoinJoin feature, you still benefit from a trustless experience with block filters, a hidden IP address via Tor, and easy management of your wallet outputs. After you deal with KYC exchanges like Coinbase, like Kraken, Binance, Gemini, or Bitfinex, you can remove the association between your identity and your Bitcoin address by performing a few rounds of CoinJoins. To find out more about the privacy benefits and limitations of CoinJoins, listen to Bitcoin Takeover Podcast Season 6, Episode 6 with Max Hilbrand. And if you want to give Wasabi a try, go to wasabiwallet.io and download the wallet for free. Wasabi Wallet, a Bitcoin privacy wallet for the citadels.
Right, so let's say that you do get elected and you do go to Washington, just like in the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, except that your last name is Fenton. What do you think an independent who is not supported by either parties and is vulnerable to the attacks from both can do for the people of New Hampshire?
Well, I'd be a Republican, so I'd still be a member of the Republican Party. I vote more independently and libertarian, but it's not like they'd be adversarial. But mainly it's just about voting no on tyranny, on government expansion of the tax base, any kind of authoritarianism, and voting yes on freedom, the Constitution, human rights, and I think that's what I've told every group that I've met in New Hampshire, that I'll just be uncompromising about that. And it's interesting you mentioned the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the famous scene in there where he does this really long filibuster, and that power is under threat. Biden doesn't like the filibuster, where one in the U.S. Senate rules, if one senator holds the floor, as long as they hold the floor, they can hold it as long as they can talk. So there's been several in history. Rand Paul went about 12 or 14 hours. Ted Cruz went 14 hours. The record was held by Strom Thurmond from 1957. He was a Democrat protesting the Civil Rights Act. He spoke for 24 hours and 9 minutes, I think. So I wanted to try my own. So a couple weeks ago, I wanted to see how long I could go. I wanted to see if I could break Strom Thurmond's record, and I did. I broke it by 9 hours. So I went 33 hours and 18 minutes. So if I did go down there like Mr. Smith, I might do exactly what he did. I know I can break that record now because I already did it just a couple weeks ago. So on the Senate floor, I could definitely break Strom Thurmond's record. I could definitely do 24 hours, no problem. So yeah, I would do that kind of thing. I would that upsets the apple cart a little bit. There's a lot of procedural things that senators can do, which kind of, you might even annoy other senators in certain cases, like calling for a quorum. You can make people come back when they're not planning on working, and you could go and speak for a long time like that. And I would do those kind of things because I'm a disruptor. I'm in this space because I'm a disruptor. I've been a disruptor my whole life. I want to disrupt the system because I think the system's broken. I don't want to go down there and make friends and play by the rules. I want to go down there and get stuff done, which does require making friends. I don't want to make enemies, but my priority isn't down there to make friends or be anybody's rubber stamp. I really feel like where our country's headed is to a bad place, and we've got to fix that no matter what it takes to do that.
I'm not sure if you remember, but the last time we spoke, I interviewed you in December of 2019. It was right before the crazy pandemic, and you told me that you always enjoyed becoming friends with both the jocks, the sportsmen from high school, and the nerds. And that's also part of the reason why you decided to do the Satoshi's Roundtable and invite all sorts of people from developers to business developers and whatever, everyone who's interested in the space. And that to me sounded like a pretty political statement, like someone who's trying to bring people together to talk. And it seems like your political campaign is pretty much along the same lines, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'd like it to be more like that, because that is something that from the private sector, I think one of the things, maybe my biggest, accomplishment in the crypto space has been kind of bringing everybody together and being, it's very interesting now with all these debates going on with, Nick Carter and all of the discussions about maximalism and these kind of things. I feel glad I know everybody. I know everybody. I know, and I'm friends with almost all of them. I know people. I've met Nick and I've met Giacomo, and I know these people, and so I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I've been able to make friends with people who don't agree with each other necessarily. I'm friends with Vitalik has come to the roundtable. I'm friends with Vitalik. I'm friends with his dad. I'm Justin's. I got to be one of the only people who's hosted an event where Justin's son got a selfie with Adam Back. It's like I like, and I also have a really high bar on. I've met evil people. I've met Taliban and like evil people, and I have a high bar on, like, I'm not going to dislike somebody because they like a different coin, or I didn't like some of their behavior or whatever. I kind of like everybody in the space pretty much. There's people there's almost nobody I really don't like. There's a lot of people I strongly disagree with, or there's people I would never buy their product, I'd never buy their project. Or people who I disagree with some of the behavior they've had, or I feel like they've been scammy, but I have a kind of a high bar. I like to like everybody. I like to try and find the good in people. And I'd like to bring more of that to politics. I like I mentioned, I try and talk to people on the other side. Just having more discussion. I like people, and I like to, share ideas and find common ground. If I could do that I'm not, succeeding in like, magically bringing together Republicans and Democrats, by myself. But if I could bring a bit of that, or a bit more of that to the campaign, that might be a nice accomplishment, because we can't just have half the country hate the other half. Maybe that's something that, I could focus more on, trying to bring people together.
You also have a question from Paulie D at bitcoinhackers.org. And he wants to know, what can a state do to nullify federal overreach?
Well, New Hampshire's a great model to look at that. The New Hampshire state legislature has done a lot of things with saying that certain federal laws can't be enforced here, and, really trying to limit federal power. New Hampshire's definitely the best model. It's not something you can do in every state. New Hampshire's a very special state because of the Free State Project and the Liberty Movement and the strength of it. And it's taken 10 to 15 years to get to this point now, but we are at a point where it is a model you can follow. You can look at some of the, just look up the Free Staters and the Liberty Movement, Liberty Caucus in New Hampshire, and look at some of the bills that have been passed. Especially things related to limiting state power. There's a lot you can do. I mean, you can limit how federal power can affect people in your state.
Yeah, so now I'm going to ask you a question which has two parts. First of all, you're going against your own party members in the primaries to get the nomination, and that's going to take place next month. And after that, if you move forward, you're going to run against the other candidate who gets picked by the Democratic Party. What are your estimations in regards to your chances to win? And how can Bitcoiners help you to get a better score and go to Washington?
Yeah, it's very winnable. The major television station just a week ago did a piece. They said it's anybody's race. A very unusual Senate race. Usually by this time in the race, there's like a clear front runner. That's just not the case. There was a candidate who was kind of considered the front runner before I jumped in. Once I jumped in, it really mixed up things in the race. Not entirely because of me. There's other factors as well. Just there's like 5 major candidates. It splits the vote. There's one candidate who was expected to do quite well didn't. Another one was expected to raise more money and didn't. Another one didn't do well in the debates. So they, and then like some other candidates have done things surprisingly well or not well. So it's sort of anybody's game, which is very interesting. It's very, very winnable. All I need is kind of 60,000 votes for sure would do it. It's a very doable thing to win the primary. Once you win the primary, it's a different story. You have coalesced Republican support. So the governor and all the Republicans will back you, and then you have national support too. You'll have DeSantis or Trump or a whole huge national Republican machine that will back you, just because you have R next to your name. So both of them are quite winnable. The primary is anybody's race. My message is the strongest. I have the best chance in the general election because I can bring in the most libertarians, the most independents, all the free staters. I have the most broad appeal among Republicans. I can even get some anti-war, anti-drug war Democrats. So I have the best chance in the general, and that's very winnable. The incumbent only won by 1,000 votes last time. She's a single term. We're expecting to have a red wave. This state could definitely go red. She's polled as low as in the 30s in different polls. So it's very winnable. Best way to support me, I mean, is getting involved in the campaign, donating. Is I don't like that campaigns are so driven by money, but it's a reality. Every dollar I have, I can reach more people, and they have to find out who I am. There's a whole bunch of people who agree with me. They love my positions. They don't know that I'm running. We got to make sure every single one of them knows who I am, knows what I stand for, knows that I'm running. So donating is a huge thing. And they can do that on my website, brucefenton.com. And then sharing my content. I'm not big on self-promotion. It's taken a lot of work to kind of like get more comfortable with it. I don't like to be like, look at me, but hey, this is a political race. It actually does help. It does help if people should be sharing my content like crazy. It's like being a campaign volunteer. It's not like, oh, do I want to share his content or not? I don't want to clog my feet. No, forget about it. Just share my stuff, get it out there, because it could reach a voter and make the difference, actually get me in there and really make a difference for our country. And it does matter. We just had this bill yesterday, terrible bill, or passed Sunday by the Senate. That was by one vote. My opponent voted for it. If I would have been in that seat, I would have voted against it. So it does matter. These things do matter. The infrastructure bill was coming down to like one vote. Remember when crypto all rallied because they were it was going to affect wallets. So there's a whole bunch of Bitcoiners and everybody was all working on that infrastructure bill. The time to do that kind of advocacy is during an election, not like once the people are already there. Because if I'm in this seat, every issue that comes up for the next six years, that's one senator you don't have to lobby. If it's my opponent, you have an opponent to crypto. She has a 95% voting record with Elizabeth Warren. So if she wins again, and if I don't win the primary, she has a better chance of winning. If she wins again, that's a terrible vote against Bitcoin every vote that comes up in the next 6 years. If I win, it's a vote for Bitcoin and for freedom and for human liberty and free markets every single time without fail for 6 years. So it really does matter. It really does make a difference. So yeah, I appreciate support. I probably should have been more aggressive about support, because I feel like it's almost like a team sport politics. I've never raised any money in this space. I never did an ICO. I've never done those kind of things. I'm not comfortable asking for people for money, but you got to in politics. So, that's how it's driven. So, yeah, I appreciate everybody's support, sharing my content, donating, visiting the website. If you're in New Hampshire, voting on the primary, taking a sign, we've had hundreds and hundreds of people put out signs in their yards or place signs up in prominent locations, So yeah, it's I appreciate everybody's support.
Yeah, I do remember when you were on stage for a few moments during the Miami conference, and what you basically said is that you're not asking for money, but all you want is for people to put your sign in their yards in New Hampshire, or else reach out to people from New Hampshire who can do this. And it seems like you also need money right now. You did not expect this, but I did see that the smallest amount or the recommended amount that you find on your website is $17.87, which is $17.87, but that's a reference to the year of the American Revolution.
Yeah, so 1776, I think it is.
Oh yeah, sorry. Exactly.
Yeah. I originally, what I said at the Bitcoin Miami, I said, if you have $5 or $10 or $100, don't send it to me, stack sats, buy Bitcoin. There's nothing any politician can do, including me, more important than Bitcoin. There's not any official, even a president, it doesn't matter who you are. There's nothing that anybody can do more important than Bitcoin, in my opinion. And I think and then also politicians can't save you. They can't save your job. They can't save your economy. You can save yourself personally. So people should definitely buy Bitcoin first and stack sats. But if they've already stacked sats, and some are fortunate enough, there's wealthy people in our space, because I don't like asking money for people who don't have it. But there are people in our space there. You have listeners that are billionaires, so they should be digging down deep and max me out. If you maximum is like $5,800 for a couple, and you can donate to a pack, you can donate unlimited to a pack, So that'd be nice. Be nice to raise. I'd like to raise as much as the crypto donations to Ukraine, the $50 million. If I raised $50 million, I would 100% win, pretty much. Even $5 million, it's like 100%. My opponents raised $8 million, but she's not that effective with her spending, and her message is terrible. I have a good message and I'm very effective. So I could spend maybe almost 10 times better than her or 5 times better than her.
And part of the reason why this is necessary and why I wanted to do this interview is that we have this saying that everything is good for Bitcoin, but that only refers to the network itself. Like, you can overregulate it and you can put people in jail. You're still going to have at least a few nodes running around the world. You're still going to have miners in some countries, but that's no good for the people who cannot use it. And whether we like it or not, we need politicians to leave us alone. And when they don't want to leave us alone, we need to get involved into politics by ourselves and try to protect what's ours and what grants us more freedom. If
Absolutely.
this financial freedom goes away, we are, I guess, more susceptible to getting into this very Orwellian system with CBDCs. And I don't know, that's not the kind of future that I want myself and my unborn children to have. And it's something for which I like to stand. And I'm gonna make you a small donation after this call is over. I'm not very rich, but I still want to support you. Maybe that
I don't know if you're allowed. I think you have to be American to make a donation. Yeah, I appreciate it. But yeah, I should mention that actually, because yeah, it's kind of a pain if we get the donations, because I think we have to return them or something. We had somebody from Canada, you know, and the other thing is I'm not allowed to put just a generic address up. If I could put a generic address up, I'd probably raise $1 million, you know, if it's just like, hey, here's my address. But yeah, there's all kinds of rules about it. There's limits and stuff like that. So I do appreciate it. Thank you. But yeah, you got to be American.
I would get you into trouble if I donated. Like send I mean, that can be beneficial if the FBI raids you for a 1776 donation from Romania. I mean,
I don't think it's a raid. I think they just bury me in paperwork. Hopefully it wouldn't be the FBI, it'd be the Federal Election Commission, but I do have to follow all their rules. So, you know, but yeah, I appreciate support. You know, you can always retweet, share my stuff, you know, get me, just get the word out, especially between now and the primary. And if I win the primary, then, you know, through the election, full speed ahead.
Okay, so I'm rooting for you. There's nothing much I can do except for like your stuff on Twitter. And I hope that the listeners who are from the United States are going to think twice about their, how should I put it, their apathy in regards to politics and their lack of interest. Because whether we like it or not, we are governed by someone. And the fact that we choose to live in a certain territory means that we are subjected to some rules that are bound to change. And if we want to preserve our freedoms, we have to get involved to some extent. Even some people don't like to vote, but that's their choice, you know? If you're not voting, somebody else is making the calls for you.
Exactly. Yeah. You may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you.
Yeah, and they're very much concerned about your life when they shouldn't be. And sooner or later, you know, someone's gonna come for you for whatever reason. You might be fine today, but tomorrow, who knows? Everyone is, you know, one evil bill away from becoming a criminal. And I've learned that from the Soviet experience here in Romania. So I try my best to exercise freedom because it's like a muscle, you know, you gotta do it every day. You gotta practice your freedoms so that they're not taken away. They don't disappear.
Exactly.
So thank you very much, Mr. Fenton. It's been a pleasure. I think this has run for about an hour longer than we agreed on. So I hope I haven't postponed any other commitments that you had for today.
No, this has been great. I appreciate it. So yeah, thanks for having me. And you know, it's always great to talk to you.
Likewise. And maybe we're gonna do another one after the primaries and be more specific.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Good luck with your campaign.
Right. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro.
Voltoro is the exchange where you deal with honest and hard money. There's no fiat on-ramp or off-ramp, and you get to diversify your Bitcoin portfolio into gold or silver when you sense that a bearish moment is coming. Also, you can instantly trade your gold for Bitcoin to buy the dip, And if you're into gold custody, Vaultoro can also send you the gold that you own directly from their insured Swiss vaulting facilities. Vaultoro was launched in the aftermath of the Mt. Gox hack, so since 2015 they have published monthly glass books to prove that they own all the gold reserves and all of their customers' money. Sign up today by going to vaultoro.com/Bitcoin takeover. Keep in mind that this is not financial advice and you are responsible for your own decisions. Wasabi Wallet is the perfect Bitcoin privacy wallet. It's free, it's open source, it's available on Windows, macOS, and Linux, and it offers groundbreaking Chaumian CoinJoins, which makes your Bitcoin. Even if you do not use the CoinJoin feature, you still benefit from a trustless experience with block filters, a hidden IP address via Tor, and easy management of your wallet outputs. After you deal with KYC exchanges like Coinbase, like Kraken, Binance, Gemini, or Bitfinex, you can remove the association between your identity and your Bitcoin address by performing a few rounds of CoinJoins. To find out more about the privacy benefits and limitations of CoinJoins, listen to Bitcoin Takeover Podcast Season 6, Episode 6 with Max Hilbrand. And if you want to give Wasabi a try, go to wasabiwallet.io and download the wallet for free. Wasabi Wallet, a Bitcoin privacy wallet for the citadels.